The readings we just listened to suggest a question. Does God speak to people? In other words, what type of conversations do some people have with God? And if God were, say, to be speaking to me or to you, how would you know it? How would you recognize it? Or further, what reason would God have for conversing with us? However, we realize that almost the entire Bible, from cover to cover, is filled with nothing but major conversations of God conversing, speaking with certain people in various situations and some rather serious causes. For example, starting at the beginning of the Bible, there's this lovely dialogue between Adam and Eve in the garden with God over a period of time, culminating in the dramatic exchange when they are caught committing the original sin. Or Noah, called by God, summoned to build the ark and to save certain people. Dialogue there. God is the designer and tells Noah how to do it. Or later on, Abraham, who becomes our ancestor in faith. He's the first person who God calls and holds into a long relationship. We call that the Old Covenant with Sarah. And he produces many children over time through his descendants, starting with Isaac. Lots of dialogue there. The dialogue of the conception of Isaac. Later, the conversation of God saying, rather dramatically, I want the boy back. Sacrifice him to me. And then canceling that. So all these exchanges between God and people are very lofty, but they're very real. Let me go on further. Moses, for 40 years, called by God, sent to Pharaoh, led the Israelites across the Red Sea, 40 years of wandering in the desert, the 10 Commandments, lots of exchanges, some of them rather bitter, between God and Moses, yet very constructive. And then his successor Joshua, other leaders like Gideon, Deborah, Samuel, called when he was still a boy in training by God. Later, King David, chosen by God through Samuel to be a future lofty king. His son, King Solomon, who built the temple. And a week or two ago, God calls up Solomon and starts the conversation. Solomon, ask of me anything you want. I will give it to you. And in the exchange, Solomon says, give me wisdom, competence. There it is. And so on. Queen Esther, Tobiah, the charming story of healing. John the Baptizer, called by God while he's in the womb. He's kicking for joy. Mary, in this first window, is invited by God through the archangel to conceive God himself, the creator, in the person of Jesus. And of course, God talks to Joseph the carpenter about taking Mary. And goes on and on. And that just begins the New Testament. All the works of Paul, John the Apostle, and so on, and the evangelists, where Jesus himself is speaking now in the Gospels as he does today with Peter. The list is endless if we go beyond the Bible through the church's 2,000 years of tradition of men and women who feel they've had deep conversations or promptings from God that inspire and direct them for the good of the church. And those things really happened. They're just very hard to document. There are no tape recorders or live streams when they're going on. But it's our turn today on this Sunday to meditate through the scriptures we heard. How is this happening in our life? It may help us realize something. There are two very dramatic episodes in the readings, the first and the gospel. The first one talks of Elijah, the greatest of the prophets, the icon of all future prophets who come after him, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth. And also in the New Testament, Peter, who's sort of the lead apostle. Each of these two personalities in the events are facing a real crisis, a threat, a danger, some bad omen of violence about to happen in some way. Take, for example, Elijah. He's hiding in a cave in the desert somewhere. He's on the run. He's fleeing from the enemies of God. Tragically, the enemies of God are his fellow religious confreres. Exhausted from running and in pursuit by others, he hides in this cave, afraid. And he wonders if God will ever protect him from the enemy pursuing him. Now, Peter is the opposite case. In his situation, he's not running away from anyone. He just came from an astounding miracle of Jesus. The miracle of the loaves and the fishes, so astounding that over 15,000 people were fed on the hillside. and a lot of leftovers were gathered. He's in a simple boat cruise with the other apostles and disciples. Jesus says, you guys meet me across the lake, a lake they were very familiar with. These are seasoned fishermen, and so a lake should not be a problem to cross. But the enemy is not the people this time. It seems to be the sudden squall that appears on a stormy lake. The fear of capsizing and drowning, that drives terror into their hearts. Now, we should go a little further, because in both cases the danger seems to be symbolized by Mother Nature. In the Elijah case, you've got hurricane winds of great force, maybe a Category 5 tornado. It's hurling boulders outside the cave. Nature can be very furious. What did the ancient world think of that? Earthquakes, which could destroy cities or parts of them. This month of August, we will celebrate the 9th anniversary of the mineral earthquake there. And then these massive fires, what California is going through with their forest fires and destruction, and elsewhere too. Nature can be very furious, and in the ancient world, they considered nature controlled by the different gods and goddesses. Thunder and lightning, Jupiter's hurling bolts down. Neptune, the god of the sea, causing storms and waves and tsunamis and stuff. So people began to adore those gods. But God is not in the hurricane or the storm or the earthquake or the fire. He is somewhere else. But the storms we just heard of, both Peter and Elijah, outside the cave or on the lake, could also be in a deeper meaning from the Holy Spirit about something that's inimical, hostile and destructive, but it's not the weather at all. It actually is people, the evil forces through history that push against God. God is the God of nature. He controls it, as Peter and the others found out when Jesus climbed into the boat. Okay, what is Elijah hiding from? That God is not present in those evil things. In fact, he goes to the mouth of the cave and all that subsides, and finally he discovers the voice of God, the voice he desperately wants to hear, that will inspire him and give him further direction, as God will do. It's a tiny whisper. What is God saying? He's telling Elijah, the God you adore and worship is not a God who exercises enormous power and force like nature. It's a tiny voice that can carry a lot more meaning, content, and substance than anything we attribute to nature or even to the great sciences too. More content in this tiny event than the outward cacophony of the world. He's telling Elijah, if God is really God, then a mere whisper from him is all it's going to take for him to achieve his purpose in the situation at hand. Now, we know Peter very well. We've seen his character and personality rather developed through the 4 Gospels and his 2 letters, and in the Acts of the Apostles. A lot about him. He's had a lot of encounters with Jesus as Peter grows and develops in maturity, in his competence, most of his own self-understanding. Does he know who he really is? He knows who Jesus is, but he's got to know himself. This encounter on the Sea of Galilee was a symbol that God is using to teach Peter a very powerful lesson Peter needs to learn. He would need to become, if he's going to be entrusted with the keys of the kingdom to be the leader of the fragile infant church, he's going to know how to be that kind of competent leader. Peter often lacked courage. Sometimes he misunderstood what the Lord was trying to tell him. And as we know from Holy Week, that other tragic event, Peter brags loyalty and publicly even denies the Christ, whom earlier he professed he knew his identity. As they said in the boat, you are the Son of God. And so it would happen. Peter is going to be facing many temptations, challenges, and crises in life, some of them because of his own weakness, and others because they beset him. He would later shepherd the fragile flock of Jesus. So in the storm we've just heard proclaimed, a threat is there to the existence of the church's own fragile identity. For in that boat are the apostles with Peter and some other disciples, all in one boat, putting all your eggs in one basket as Jesus arranges to meet them elsewhere. The storm could swamp the boat. They could drown. it'd all be lost, and Jesus would have to start all over with new apostles and disciples. But we look further, we realize throughout the 20 centuries of the church's existence, I cannot think of a single century or even a decade when somewhere, somehow, someplace, the church was being attacked from without by hostile forces that resist her teachings. Look at communist China today. You know, the church is being circumscribed by a dictator who wants to appoint the bishops and really control what the Vatican's leadership is. The successor of Peter is Pope Francis. We go back, we just celebrate 200 years of the Diocese of Richmond coming into existence, but the Pope who erected the diocese in 1820 had just finished 5 years of prison time under a Catholic emperor in France, Napoleon Bonaparte. And the whole reason for that, threatening the ship of the church, was Napoleon wanted to do then what communist China wants to do today and many other places, to choose the bishops, to appoint the church, erect dioceses, and stuff like that. And 500 years ago, Henry VIII started the whole process of taking the Church of England away from the Church of Rome. And there it is. The church is bouncing on seas and storms all the time. Or she's huddled in a cave, howling winds and fire and earthquakes outside threatening her. In any crisis, good leadership is necessary and urgent. Like even in our political situation, we will choose in November, less than 100 days, I believe, a Congress, the Senate, 1/3, the White House, and many other governorships in the nation, among other major and minor places of election. In this crisis, the boat, Peter recognizes in the storm, and in the middle of the night, fourth watch of the night, around 12 midnight, the Lord coming toward them. It's fantastic. But Jesus had just completed a major miracle. This could be possible too. Peter is recognizing that God can do the impossible. The God over nature is super nature. He recognizes the Lord and he asks the Lord a request. Lord, command me to walk on the water. Command me to do what really is naturally impossible. That's what the church is facing in every age and every year, doing the impossible. And he begins to walk successfully on the waves. His leadership then is starting off very well. He asks, Jesus calls, and invites. But suddenly Peter begins to pay more attention. He's distracted. What's going on around him? Hey guys, look at me. I'm walking on the water. I can do this. Paying attention to himself, to externals. And therefore he begins to sink. And that kind of character will happen many times as he grows in esteem in Jesus' mind. The solution to Peter's sinking is simply this: Christ. Pay attention to the Lord. Only the Lord can save us and the church in a crisis. Only the Lord can overcome our tendency to doubt his power. So, whether now it's this major pandemic going into 4.5 months or more, or any kind of crisis that besets us in life, our personal lives, people who've lost income or businesses, people who've lost loved ones, people who are quarantined and so on, or other things in life, difficulties in family life, or vocations to the priesthood or what. Everywhere there's some storm raging around us. It besets us, it makes us afraid, or it causes us to doubt. There's nothing wrong with being afraid or doubting. We're human creatures and we are fragile. But we can be so wrapped up in the serious problems that surround us and whirl around us that we may be forgetting something that's right in front of our eyes. We may be forgetting that the Lord himself is really paying a lot more attention to us than we think he is. He may be waiting for us at the entrance to our little cave, or if we only could hear him whisper without the din of the noise that distracts us and competes with this listening that's so delicate. Or we may be sinking in the dark sea, and it is then we might just recognize the Lord coming towards us, as Peter and the apostles did. God has that solution. So the message today is to be aware of God speaking to us. He hasn't left anyone out, especially our faithful people who are here, and our people, most of them who are watching us on the live stream and want to, and everywhere else. Holding church in some way because we are paying attention more to the Lord than to what's going on around us. That's going to help. Also, it's a recommendation that during lockdown, restriction, social distancing could be a time to recover or push back on the distracting world and create each day a moment of silent time in solitude. Find the cave in your house, or when you're driving alone in the car, or out for a walk alone yourself. And in that solitude, 4 or 5 minutes, think of God, think of your own situation, and also be attentive to God from scriptures that He is at work in the world, as we found out this morning in these readings. So without distraction, in my little private prayer space, or Ash Wednesday, Jesus says, go into your inner room up here, close the door, and talk to your Father in secret. Then your Father, who hears you in secret, will be listening to you. We want to be assured of that. And over time, it will happen. A few weeks ago, St. Paul reminded us too, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, for we often do not pray as we ought. And in the morning opening prayer of the Mass, that lovely salute again. Heavenly Father, you dare to call us your sons and daughters by an adoption that took place through Jesus. Sons and daughters are listened to by every father, but more so, sons and daughters are listened to more carefully by God who made us in His image and likeness. So this gives us confidence to look for that solitude, that quiet, that inner peace. And over time we may be discerned, like Elijah or Peter, the Lord speaking to us and assisting us.